Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in condemning the Internal Revenue Service for intentionally singling out dozens of nonprofit organizations for no cause other than their political leanings. This is not an issue of Democrat versus Republican. Indeed, the actions of the IRS have brought rare bipartisan accord, including here on this floor. There are lessons for all of us in this scandal. One is that government that's too big, too powerful, and too all-encompassing is prone to overstep its bounds. It's become unwieldy and inefficient, and sometimes it tramples upon the rights of the people it's supposed to serve. We have an IRS that targeted groups of Americans, threatening them with the force of law and imprisonment for no other reason than they had certain political affiliations. We know now that the IRS selected these groups by zeroing in on certain words and certain phrases. And what were those words and phrases that elicited such concern in the halls of the IRS? Words like patriot, words like we the people. It seems to me we can draw only one of two conclusions from the actions of the IRS. Either some intentionally attempted to use the power of the federal government to target and cripple their political enemies, or they lack the competence to oversee a bureaucracy that has grown too big not to fail. One thing is for sure, though. The reputation of the IRS has been tarnished in ways that will take time to repair, and it's imperative that we restore the trust that has been lost between the American people and our government. That work begins by getting to the bottom of what happened. We've got lots of questions that need answers. Did the IRS officials act on their own, or did they have discretion from their superiors? How high up does this scandal go? What did the White House know, and when did they know it? The scandal comes as Washington is preparing to hand over even more power and authority to the Internal Revenue Service. It would be the IRS that enforces the mandates of the new health care law. It will be the IRS that will have control over some of our most private, personal decisions. It's not too late to change course, but if we insist on placing the blame for IRS's actions on a few low-level staffers without looking at the root cause of the abuse, corruption, or a government that, as the President's former senior advisor, David Axelrod recently admitted, has become too vast to manage and oversee, then we will continue to witness scandals like this one. Big government comes with big problems, big scandals, and sometimes big dangers for our liberties. The Tea Party and organizations like it have been arguing that position since they were founded. And while I know there's some in this chamber who will not like hearing this, it turns out the Tea Party's fears were justified here. Mr. President, we need more than just an audit of what happened at the IRS. We've given the IRS every opportunity to deal with this issue internally. More than a year ago, Senator Hatch and I sent a letter to the IRS expressing our concern about the targeting of conservative groups. We received a response assuring us that our concerns were unfounded. Everything was okay. We now know that that response was false, perhaps intentionally misleading. Tuesday, former Commissioner Stephen Miller appeared before the Finance Committee in which I serve. During that hearing, he claimed that while he had dispatched a team to investigate our concerns a month before he responded to our letter, in response to our letter, his response to the letter was sent without input from the team. In other words, he sent a team to investigate this. A month went by, then he responded to our letter, but without the information that they had given him. He claims he did learn that targeting had occurred, but he learned that a week after misinforming us that everything was fine. He said when he heard, he was outraged, and yet he never corrected the record, choosing instead to follow the false response that he had sent us. He allowed it to stand. So, Mr. President, at the very least, we have a situation where the IRS, knowing what had happened, a week after they sent us a response saying everything was fine, refused to correct the record. I believed them at the time, as did others on the committee. And unfortunately, we were misinformed. Yesterday, Lois Lerner, the head of the IRS's Tax-Exempt Organizations Division, declined to answer questions regarding the scandal, deciding instead to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. This is not a way to get to the bottom of it. Despite all this, the IRS asked us to trust them that when they tell us that this scandal was simply a result of a few misguided, low-level employees and that no senior officials were involved. With all due respect, Mr. President, I think members of my committee, and certainly I, am done taking the IRS's word for it. We need an in-depth investigation, one that fully documents the what, when, and who of the scandal. Only when we get to the bottom of this incident can we begin to rebuild the bridge of trust between us as citizens and our federal government here in Washington, D.C.